You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Thank you so much for joining me today on this Total Wellness Tuesday. Excited to be bringing you a topic that has literally been getting so much attention over about the last 6 months. And I've been getting many requests for reviews of a book called The Plant Paradox. It's probably the first book, I would say, at least the first complete book, to go over one topic. And that one topic that hasn't been yet been covered in as much depth is lectins, right? So it's going over a low-lectin diet, and if lectins in general are dangerous. So if you've never heard of a low-lectin diet, if you've never heard of lectins in general, if you've never heard the book, The Plant Paradox, we're going to go over all of that today. And really, what you need to know, I believe this does and will affect everyone. And then, of course, what action can you take at the end? Because it's not enough to know what a lectin is, or should you be in a low-lectin diet, a keto diet, a primal diet, a paleo diet, all these different diets. You know, it's like, what diet is this month? What's diets next month? There's always going to be an up and down, and there's waves and these fads and all of these things. But if you understand where they're coming from, well, then you can know, is this real? And should I apply it to my own life? And so for some people, the answer is always yes. And for others, well, it really doesn't mean anything to you. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, so let's get into that right now. So what is a lectin? The easiest and best way to think of a lectin, this is how I like to think of it, is essentially a sticky protein. So they're contained in most of the vegetable or vegan-based foods. So what does that mean? Well, here's the thing. With the skin of a plant or a fruit or a vegetable and the seeds inside, they're going to contain quite a bit of lectins. Okay, so what are these lectins? Well, the lectins protect the plants. So if a plant is not yet mature, it's going to have higher amounts of lectins. Well, what does that mean? It means that if an insect, a bug, or an animal went to eat that plant, it would make an animal such as, let's just say, a dog quite sick. But then it would actually it would shut down the nervous system of a bug or something like that. So what that plant is doing, that's its protective mechanism. It would essentially say and signal to these animals, don't touch me, you can get hurt. That is its protection, right? Because it doesn't have hands, it can't fight back, it doesn't have claws or teeth or any of these things. So it's nature's way of saying, well, in nature's way of saying two things, back off. And the other thing is, I'm not ripe yet. Okay, that's what a lot of people miss with a low-lectin diet. Fruits and vegetables is what I'm talking about right now. As a fruit ripens, or as a plant ripens, usually as a plant ripens, it's producing fruit. Well, that fruit in the beginning, until it's ripe, is going to contain quite a bit of lectins, okay? But as the fruit ripens, the lectins go down, and then the animal is welcome to eat that fruit. Why would it be okay for an animal to eat a fruit or for a plant to allow that animal to eat it? And the reason is this. That's how the plant lives on. So for a lot of plants, they produce fruit. As the animal eats the fruit, what isn't digested are the seeds. The seeds then come out in the stool of the animal and then get replanted into the ground. It's a beautiful cycle in nature, and that's how a lot of these things work. Other things in nature where the animal doesn't eat the seed, they can see the outside skin. Let's just say think of it almost like a pit to a nectarine or something like that. They're not going to consume that, but they're going to leave it on the ground, right? And on the ground, then it has the ability to regrow as a new tree, a new fruit-based tree. So that's one way to look at it. But in humans and in larger animals as well, some people are more susceptible to lectins than others. So I want to go through all of these things today. So we think about it. If we eat the seeds of a fruit or a vegetable, if we want to look at it that way, although anything really with a seed would be considered more of a fruit-based category, and we'll go through that as well, things like tomatoes and squash. So here's the thing. What happens is these lectins in people that already have leaky gut, it can bind to cell receptors. Okay, that means the cells of your body, the lectins, these sticky proteins, can actually bind to them. When it binds to the outside of your cells, it can disrupt normal cell signals. It can also block other potential receptors on those cells from regulating proper amounts of sugar getting into the cell or hormones being allowed in as well, meaning that the outside of the cells are almost like locks and keys, okay? So you have all these different locks on the outside of a cell, and then something like insulin would come in with a key and then allow sugar to get into the cell. Same thing with estrogen, other things as well. Like let's just say you took in some sprouted organic tofu, right? And it has soy estrogen, but it has these things called isoflavones or lower dose estrogen. Well, in some menopausal women, that could be quite beneficial for them, not at high dosages, not every day. But what it can do is that it can actually help block some of the higher levels of estrogen in a woman's body, own natural production with lower plant-based estrogens. Again, should every woman be doing this? No, but this is a particular instance where that also works. So again, when people say, never do this, never do that, they're typically wrong. And I think they're doing it in a well-meaning way, but things are always right and they're always wrong. You just have to know how to apply it to your life and when. And when you're healthy, most of these things don't matter, as we're going to see. But you have to get yourself healthy first, and you have to know that you're healthy. That's the hard thing, right? So what happens, though, is when these lectins that we eat unknowingly from grains, and I'm going to go through the whole list in a moment, if they are allowed to move through that gut wall, and they can also cause disruption in the gut wall. We'll talk about that in a moment. They can actually cause inflammatory gut-based issues like irritable bowel disease. They can inflame celiac. They can give IBS, those types of issues as well. And they can actually cause a little bit of leaky gut, for sure. They can cause a little bit of leaky gut as well. But let's say they get into the bloodstream, they can then start to cause inflammatory-based responses in the body, okay? They can actually create or be the causal factor for a lot of autoimmune-based diseases. I want to go through those in a moment, but if you've heard of something like rheumatoid arthritis, or you've heard of Hashimoto's, or you've heard of celiac, you're beginning to look at that. A lot of people don't know, though, there's a lot of evidence, and I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but a lot of evidence that type 1 diabetes, childhood type 1 diabetes, diabetes mellitus, very could be well caused by lectins, high lectins in the diet, a lot of times from a specific type of milk. I don't want to get into that right now, but a specific type of cow's milk. I'm going to do a whole separate show on essentially type 1 versus type 2. We'll call it that. That's an easier way to say it, of milk. So we're going to go over that in a moment. But what I'd like to say is this. Anytime you increase the immune system, meaning like lectins can fire up the immune system. If the immune system begins to become overactive, it can increase cytokine production. This is inflammatory and it can stimulate the nervous system. All right. It can activate these things called TLRs, toll-like receptors. What happens is that can then overexcite the immune system. We can get a cascade of inflammatory-based reactions, and it can cause an imbalance that I've spoken about before between this thing called the Th1 and Th2, the T helper cells of the immune system. I don't want to get too deep on this, but understand this, that when the body becomes imbalanced, it becomes overactive on one side and underactive on another. That is a lot of times what we're looking at with things like psoriasis and eczema and rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune-based issues as well. So before we get into does that matter, and if you have an autoimmune disease, should you be worried about this, let's talk about what are some of these foods that contain lectins in the first place. You might be wondering, am I even eating these? I think that's important to go through. So the biggest offenders of lectins are going to be legumes, beans, lentils, chickpeas, peanuts, cashews. And peanuts and cashews might say, well, they're nuts. Well, really, they fall into more of the legume-based family. And just think of legumes in general as beans. Well, beans, since they have that outer layer, that skin, and even inside, you're going to get higher levels of lectins. I'm going to show you a way to reduce those lectins in a moment, but just know that they're going to be offenders, the biggest offenders. So if you have a lectin issue, for sure, you're going to be one of the first things you're going to eliminate would be beans. Okay. Other things like tomatoes and squash. A lot of people don't know that because they think, oh, well, those are okay. But really, I remember back, I can actually remember this, my grandmother peeling tomatoes and taking out the seeds. And she didn't know why she was doing it. She was simply taught that generation. They peeled all the tomatoes. I think it sounds kind of funny to peel a tomato, but literally they took the skin off and they took all the seeds out and they just used the flesh of the tomato. Now, maybe they were doing that because they were taught that you should not have all those seeds and the skin in there because that could cause an inflammatory-based reaction. So I found that interesting when I was doing my research on lectins. And I mean, so for me, lectins has always been a big part of my life. I do want to talk a little bit about that as well. I've been studying lectins now for about a decade. It is a pretty obscure topic. That's why I'm very happy that Dr. Stephen Gundry wrote the book, The Plant Paradox, but you'll get my full review of that in a moment. But again, this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart since I had to do a complete lectin avoidance diet. Okay, so anything with skins and seeds, I mentioned that, but just keep in mind if you're eating any type of seed, it's going to be higher in lectins, all right, for the most part. I have a couple exceptions, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Nightshades. Nightshades are huge offenders. And again, I've given this recommendation, small percentage of population, but eliminating things like potatoes and tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, and even random things like goji berries. A lot of people don't know that, but goji berries, believe it or not, are high. They're a nightshade and they're higher in lectins. Now, fruit is usually okay. Which fruit aren't okay? Apples, blueberries, cherries, raspberries, strawberries, kiwis, citrus, plums, pomegranates, they can be higher in lectins for sure, okay? The skins, and of course the seeds as well, but just think of the skins can be particularly an issue. Now, what do I want to mention though? Any fruit that is not in season or fully ripe is going to be higher in lectins. I've even seen studies, this is very interesting, that as an animal or insect begins to nibble on a fruit, and let's say that fruit is not fully ripe, it will actually shift higher amounts of lectins to the area that the animal is nibbling on. It's, pretty amazing what the plant kingdom can really do. And so that's why I'm going to be more and more interested in hearing about a lot more of this research as well, because it's pretty amazing. And then grains, all grains for the most part in general, except for wild rice and amaranth, are going to be high in lectins. Okay, some higher than others. I'll tell you how to reduce that in a moment. And believe it or not, a lot of people are like, well, I'm just going to be on a paleo diet and I'm going to eat meat. I'm going to eat poultry. I'm going to eat fish. I'm going to eat eggs, and I'm going to have some dairy or raw dairy, whatever it might be. I'll tell you right now, if those animals or fish or whatever it might be have been grain fed, and believe me, farm-raised fish, for the most part, conventionally farmed animals, that includes eggs, are going to be fed grain, believe it or not. Corn, all sorts of grains, antibiotics, of course. They're given Tums, which is completely insane. So Skittles, believe it or not, cows are given Skittles to fatten them up. So all of those products that you think are paleo are also going to be higher in lectins because you are what the animal or the plant ate. That's basically the bottom line. And so if the meat that you're eating was fed corn and soy and grains and Skittles and hormones, well, you're eating that as well. So it's really important to look into because I know people are trying to be as good as they can, right? And I use good in air quotes, but you have to look at where your food is coming from. It's just so important. That's why I'm such an advocate and fan of going to your local farmer's market. Talk with all the different vendors there. What do they feed their animals if you're going to eat some meat? Well, what do they feed them? Is it grass fed? And I would say even one more thing to ask is this: is it grass finished or green finished? Meaning that a lot of times an animal is grass fed and they're allowed to say it's grass fed. However, for the last 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months, they will grain finish the animal, which means they'll actually give them grains to fatten them up a little bit before they become your food. So very interesting to me, meaning you can ask the simple question, are your animals grass fed year round? And are they green finished or grass finished as well? Really important to ask that. And of course, not everyone eats meat, totally understandable. And let's say you eat fish. Is it wild fish? Look for that. If not, the studies that are coming out with these now GMO salmon is just very, very disturbing. And the salmon literally swimming in kids' swimming pools and swimming in their own feces, being fed, again, Skittles, which blows my mind. And they must just have really some special deal with the Skittles manufacturer. And they're being fed things like soy and corn and ground up chicken and feces and all that. And that's truly what they're fed. It's fairly disturbing. And then eggs. Well, is the eggs allowed to be out in the field and be pastured on their own, meaning they're eating grubs and twigs and worms and all those things? Or are they feeding them soy and are they feeding them other corn and things like that as well? So really interesting to look at. And I want you to take that in consideration because you're not on a low-lectin diet if you're eating meats thinking that you're avoiding all of these grains and things and vegetables if you're eating higher omega-6 grain-fed animal products. Okay, so now what are low-lectin foods? So low-lectin foods, I already named a lot of them, but they're the amaranth and the wild rice, They're the grass and green fed and finished meat, dairy, eggs, those types of options. I'm not a huge advocate of cow's milk. I'm really not. I see it cause more harm than good in general in the population, especially with children. So if you're going to do dairy because you just think that it's the right thing to do for you, I would certainly opt for a sheep or goats-based variety. For the most part, sheep and goat are not fed grain in the same way. They're not looking to fatten them up in the same way as a cow that can get to 1,500 to 2,000 pounds, which is insane. If you see a cow that's grass finished, you'll never get that much meat off of it, which is why they try to fatten up cows to a much greater level with the conventional-based methods of farming. But it's not healthy. It's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for the animals, for sure. But sheep and goat, smaller proteins, easier to digest, do not contain nearly the same level of IGF, growth hormone, any of those things, even naturally. Okay. So wild-caught seafood, you can certainly do that. Pastured eggs, that would be fine. A couple nuts and a couple seeds are okay, meaning they're lower lectins, because for the most part, I may not have said this, but nuts and seeds are higher in lectins. Again, they don't allow animals and insects to eat them. That's their protective coating. Okay. Well, here's the deal, though. Coconut, macadamia, pecans, walnuts, pistachios, those are all lower lectin foods. Now, they contain lectins, but they're lower lectin nuts. Okay, flax, sesame, and hemp. Those are lower lectin seeds, so you can look into those varieties. And I'm going to give you some other updates in a moment because I want you to lower them even to a greater degree, especially for the people that are on my candida and bacterial overgrowth plan. They want to be limiting those as well. Olive oil, avocados. You could do some nut oils. I'm not a huge advocate of nut oils. I'm really not, because they become rancid really fast. I'm a bigger proponent of cold pressed, organic, in a dark bottle, first pressed olive oil. I think it's 100% olive oil. One of the best things you can have, really, really great overall for your health. So many studies. I've given the studies on olives and olive oil before. Never buy the huge bottle of an oil. It will oxidize. Every time you take that cap off, it will oxidize. Buy small bottles, dark container, use them up within a week to 2 weeks, and then buy your next bottle. Okay, so avocados, though, can be really, really great. And then pretty much all fruit that is ripe, good to go. I gave the ones that you want to limit. Okay, now here's the important thing, though, because legumes are never going to be low lectins. What can you do if you want to eat some grains and you want to eat some legumes, meaning beans and all of those things? And what about nuts and seeds? Like all of these vegan-based varieties, like what can you do? Well, for one, if the vegetable or that type of thing is able to be peeled, well, you can lower the lectin amount by simply peeling anything, right? By peeling a carrot or a parsnip, peeling a cucumber. All of those things will lower the lectin load. But the other thing you can do for grains and for beans and all of these things, simply soak them overnight. I mean, soaking, I'll just give you the simplest method. Put them in a bowl with water, just make sure they're fully covered, and you're going to soak them overnight. You're going to then dump out the water and you're going to wash them off because the contaminants, phytic acid, things can be in that water. You can soak them again if you want to, or you can take it to the next level, would be sprouting them, all right? After you soak them, you can sprout them. You can just basically, after you soak them, you can spread them out on a towel, whatever you'd like, and you can actually allow them to break open with a little sprout. Okay, that's purely optional. So here's the other thing. You might say, like, this is way too much work. Well, you can buy sprouted beans. You can buy soaked and sprouted grains, like super simple. Or you can buy fermented versions as well. So if you soak something, if you sprout something, and if you ferment something, you're going to lower and deactivate the lectins in those grains. So much so that they're almost non-existent. So like really, really easy to do. So you might say like, oh, I have to avoid all these different foods. True. Or you can simply go to your grocery food store and buy the soaked and sprouted or fermented based grains and legumes. And that makes it a lot easier for you. Another thing is pressure cooking or cooking in general. Pressure cooking literally destroys the lectins. So you can look at it that way. Or you say, I don't want to pressure cook everything. Well, even just cooking things, especially in some water, if you're doing like a stew or something like that. But if you're cooking things, it breaks down the lectins. So super, super simple. Meaning that if you ever ate raw grains or raw beans or raw peanuts, you can make yourself really sick because they're super high in lectins. But once you start to cook them, once you start to sprout them, and that's what, so 100,000 years ago, people were eating grains that people say that they weren't. Well, we have evidence of that. But they were soaking them, they were sprouting them, they were fermenting them, they were doing all sorts of things to make them more edible. Because a lot of times you didn't have the ability to go out and always be able to get whatever you wanted in terms of like eggs and seafood and all those different types of things. That just wasn't always happening. So humans had to look for other ways of being able to eat all of these different foods. And we are able to for the most part. However, who should be staying away from lectins? Well, here's the deal. So, let me give you one more tip. I didn't know if I was going to give this or not, but I want to give this to you. I want to make sure that I keep this podcast to my limit, but meaning like time-wise, because I want to respect your time always. And I will do more on this if people want to hear more about this topic. Some people are just more susceptible. So what I've been looking into is genetic susceptibility. So a few people with MTHFR-based single nucleotide polymorphism, so they're just called SNPs. It's the RS number 1801133 and RS number 1801131. Now, there are other ones as well, but you want to look, if you've run your genetics, you can look for those two specific SNPs. And another one, so this is interesting because I do a lot of work with CBD oil and cannabinoids. Well, a lot of people with a low-functioning CB1 receptor, cannabinoid 1 receptor, with the SNP RS1049353, it could be one of the reasons why those people are producing more inflammation and why CBD oil might be one of those things that helps lower that inflammatory-based response. So we're learning more and more about this. I would like to bring in a genetic component to the future, talk more about that, but also people that are more susceptible to lectin sensitivity, okay, are those people on PPI, so stomach acid blockers, because they're allowing lectins and other bacteria just into their gut, essentially because they're shutting down their digestive process. So really important to look at it. If you're on a PPI, you need to fix your gut function right away and work with your doctor to wean off of those. They're horrible for you in the long run. They really, really are. Sleep deprivation, antibiotic use. I want to kind of just go through the list that I've been thinking about. Anyone with higher levels of omega-6, lower levels of omega-3s, people who over-exercise, they've shown those people who run more marathons or excessive stress on the body, super, super important. And then lower levels of vitamin D3, lower levels of vitamin A for sure can decrease the immune response and allow for more lectin sensitivity. So who is the most sensitive? Who are the people who should be really staying away from lectins? Okay, if you're suffering right now from allergies, from asthma, from joint pain, from brain fog, from moodiness, from excessive mucus production when you eat, or urinary tract weakness, that was an interesting one. I started to look deeper into the research. Urinary tract weakness, like almost feel like you can't fully eliminate the fullness of your bladder. And then skin rashes. So we're looking at autoimmune-based issues like rheumatoid arthritis with the joint pain. We're looking at psoriasis, eczema. We're looking at the allergies. We're looking at the fatigue, the brain fog for sure. And a big one is Hashimoto's, okay? Hashimoto's, celiac. I mean, really believe this. You have to cut gluten out of your diet. It just has to be eliminated, and you want to run a food sensitivity test. Let me take one more step back, okay? So autoimmune in general, skin rashes in general, joint pain and brain fog. That's where I've seen it, okay? That's where I've predominantly seen it. I will add seasonal allergies to that mix as well. Why did I have to figure this out for myself? And why wasn't anybody talking about it? Well, hardly anybody talks about it to this day, but I had to figure it out because I had massive histamine issues when I was younger. So that means I had wild allergies, meaning like so bad so that during the spring, my eyes would literally close up. They wouldn't open. They would close up, swell shut. And when I would open them, they would be red and like glass. It was almost like my eyes were just, they had cuts and scratches all over them. I mean, it was debilitating. And I was actually not able to figure this out until maybe 6 years ago. It wasn't that long ago because that was kind of like another missing piece, meaning like I always felt great, but for 3 weeks right after my birthday, so like right in April, brutal allergies. And what happened was it was the specific season before, just as the buds were just starting, no pollen, just the budding, that would be it for me. So people are like, how do you have allergies right now? There's no pollen in the air. Well, there was, but it was this slight budding of things like oak trees and higher mold because of the dampness. But it was exacerbated by lectins. So here's what I did. I lowered the mastocytosis, the histamine issue, by figuring out what the lectins were and fully healing my gut. Because why? Because here's the deal. The Plant Paradox is a good book. It's a great book. Stephen Gundry's a very brilliant man, very, very smart. But here's the deal. I honestly believe, and I know that he does as well, for sure, that it's an issue, but it's really not an issue. The issue here is leaky gut and gut-based issues. Because it was only about, if you've read the book, about out of 300 pages, it was only about the first 80 pages or so that he's talking about lectins. Everything else is just about health in general. It really is. Like, it's always about health in general, and it's about leaky gut and gut-based issues. And at the end, so if lectins were always a major issue, at the end, he would not have said, eliminate them first and then start to add them back in, right? Because he believes as well, in not a high protein diet. He believes in a blue zone based diet. He believes in getting in fruits and vegetables. So he believes that we should eat lectins. Like, that's the crazy thing. That's why, you can't just take a quick synopsis. If you read this book, it's not even about lectin sensitivities. It's about healing the gut, and it's about healing the body and reducing the inflammation. And I totally agree. But don't think that you're supposed to be on a low lectin diet for life. Here's what you want to do. The solution's always the same. It really is for these gut-based issues and autoimmune and the brain fog and the joint pain and the skin issues. What you have to do is this, okay? If possible, you want to run an organic acids test, a food sensitivity, and a stool-based test. You want to assess your gut function. It only makes sense, right? On an organic acid test, what do you look for? Yeast overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, Clostridium difficile, bacterial-based markers. You want to look at those things, right? And you look at neurotransmitters, you look at the waste markers of those because it's a waste-based test. You're looking at B vitamins, all those great things. And on a food test, well, what are you looking at? Well, you're looking at 94 healthy foods. You're looking at it from an IgG perspective, not immediate, but a delayed response, which is an inflammatory response a day or two later that doesn't show up as bloating. Okay, that would be the yeast, that would be the bacteria or the H. pylori. This shows up as joint-based pain. You'd never contribute it really or attribute it to food. And the stool test would show you if you have parasites or bacterial overgrowth such as E. coli, and it would show you if you have H. pylori. Those are the big three. I'll link them up in the show notes today. Go to StephenCabral.com/781. Now, you can try to run them with your local functional medicine practitioner. That would be great if you can do that. You can run them. You can take control of your own health, as I always say, and you're able to purchase them on your own. And I'll put those links in today. But if you feel like, you know what, I can't afford the labs or I don't want to do the labs, here's the deal. Remove the pathogens. Remove the pathogens that are keeping you unwell. First, do a lectin avoidance diet. I already gave you the foods. Here's what I want to do. I'm going to actually give you an infographic. There was a website. I'm going to look back at the website. I'm going to give them full credit, of course, and I'm going to link it up. So go to 781. I will give you the full food list. All the foods that are higher lectins, all the ones that are lower lectins, and then how to sprout, how to do all those great things, right? So you can still eat the foods. But lectin avoidance diet in the beginning, if you don't want to test, okay, I recommend the testing, but if you don't want to, then we're going to do a lectin avoidance diet. And we'll do something like the Candida and bacterial overgrowth protocol. We'll remove everything. We'll remove it all. And then we'll start to repopulate the gut with the good bacteria in a very specific fashion. So that we repopulate the small intestine first, and then we start to repopulate the colon, the large intestine, which is the last 5 feet. And then we'll seal up the gut wall. Once we seal up the gut wall, well, then the lectins, the proteins, they won't be able to make their way through in nearly the same degree. And that's how we help a lot of people get better. So that's the goal. I mean, the goal is literally to do this, however fashion you want to. Let's make this happen. I would love for you to pass this information on to anyone you believe it would help. That's the goal. The goal is really just learn the information yourself, implement it, show that it works, feel amazing, and then go just pay it forward. Teach it to one other person. This isn't about me. It's not my knowledge. It's not my wisdom. It's not any of mine. This is a message that I want to make sure that we get out to the world. Because if we do that, we've taken control of our own health, our own body. If we can do that, I truly believe it's life-changing. We go on then to help others. We feel amazing. We can accomplish so much with our life. Thank you so much for tuning into another Cabral concept. If this podcast was helpful, let me know. Just go to Instagram and go to Stephen Cabral, at Stephen Cabral. Let me know how you liked it, or go to cabralsupportgroup.com. That's our free private Facebook group. Feel free to comment in there. And as always, just check out the show notes page. Go to stephencabral.com/781. I'll put that infographic in there with all the foods, the lab tests, the CBO protocol. Everything will be right there. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Have an amazing rest of the day. Before you go, I wanted to ask you this question. What if I could teach you in just a couple of hours how to transform your thyroid, hormones, adrenal, cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, weight loss, energy, mood, brain, pregnancy, anti-aging, or many other health-related issues? After 20 years in private practice, after seeing and overseeing 250,000 client appointments, I sincerely feel I have the real-world data and have found the answer you've been searching for. So what I've done is spent hundreds of hours of my own time refining what you need to know in order to uncover your underlying root cause health issues and then begin to rebalance the body and bring it back to a state of robust health and wellness. I'm going to teach you exactly what I do in my private practice so you can understand how you got here and now what you need to do in order to heal. You'll receive all of the important success checklists, protocols, and even ways to customize it to make the program fit your busy life. And you'll get all of this at a fraction of the price. Let me save you the time, money, energy, stress, and frustration of not knowing what to do next. Instead of reading dozens of books on the topic and seeing multiple practitioners, I will condense everything that you need to know in just a few hours of video tutorials that you can watch and listen to anywhere. Together, we will make this healing process an enjoyable one that you can take with you for the rest of your life. I wish you all of the best of health and happiness, and I hope to be able to guide you on your healing journey through my Health Results Accelerators. Simply choose the health imbalance you're currently suffering from, and by the end of today, you'll know what went wrong and how to get well again. I guarantee it. For details, head over now to stephencabral.com/courses.